with Native American youth and mental health. So I'm honored. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So see if we're going. Are we live, Chris?
Yeah, we're live.
All right.
So welcome everybody. I am Virgil Moorhead. I'm part of the Big Lagoon Rancheria. I'm Yurok and Talawa. I'm also the Behavioral Health Director here at Two Feathers Native American Family Services. Two Feathers is located in McKinleyville, which is in Humboldt County, about 5.5 hours north of San Francisco, right on the beautiful Pacific coastline. And we've been doing this speaker series for the last month and a half, 2 months. The sort of purpose of our speaker series is to tease out the theories, approaches, ideas, routines, and tactics that guide the professionals that we interview to give our community materials and information that they can apply to working with Indigenous people. Our hope in these interviews is to help our audience to better understand, support, and serve Native American communities. And so I have one of my colleagues, Chris Shaw, on the set with me, as well as the great professor, author, and keynote speaker, Victor Rios. And so I'm going to first turn it over to Chris to introduce himself, and then back to me to introduce our guest, Victor Rios.
What's up, guys? I'm Chris. You guys may know me from Two Feathers Youth Engagement Series, but I'm also the prevention coordinator here at Two Feathers. I just started my master's program today, so I'm a little tired. I also just did a workout with our Acorn program, so I'm ready to take a nap as soon as this is done. But I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Rios and have this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. And so speaking about Dr. Rios, for those of you that aren't familiar with his work, I'm sure many of you are, Dr. Rios is a professor of sociology at UC Santa Barbara. He's an award-winning author of 6 books on educational equity, closing the opportunity gap, and the criminal justice system, to name a few issues. He's a popular keynote speaker. He was the commencement speaker at UC Berkeley School of Education, as an example. And he's also in a prize-winning documentary that was based on his life story that we'll get to in this interview, because I just watched it this morning and it was fabulous. It's got plenty of awards, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So welcome, Victor, Dr. Rios.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I'm just excited. I didn't get a chance to tell you, Virgil, but when I was in high school, I was blessed to go on a 2-week exchange trip to Yurok country. And then we camped out in Yurok country, and we actually got a chance to engage with, build community with, even organize with some of the Yurok people our age at the time, 16, 17-year-olds from the inner city, coming to meet with some of the youngsters up there that were having similar struggles. It was a powerful experience. And so to hear you, bring up this community again is just a beautiful, nostalgia that I'm getting. And also just want to shout out to Brother Chris, your master's degree that you're pursuing. I just want to say that that's the number one way to uplift our communities, is to get those degrees, open doors of opportunity for ourselves, our families, and our community. So more power to you, Brother Chris. If you ever need anything, any guidance, any support, you let me know.
Thank you. I'm definitely gonna get some support from you.
Thank you, and that's awesome. I didn't know that you'd visited Yurok country. It's beautiful up here, right?
It is amazing, man. It was spiritual. At the time, I was lost still on the streets. And so when they snatched me up, that's part of the reason they snatched me up and sent me up there to try to save me. And at the time, I didn't know about meditation. I didn't know about spirituality. I didn't know. I was lost. And I got up there, and fortunately, a lot of the young people in the region knew about being grounded, knew about spirituality, but the systems of oppression that they had encountered, like education, had stripped them away from it too. So they were struggling just like us, drug issues, gang issues, violence issues. And so it was interesting to see them go back and forth between being pulled by the side that the structures of oppression pushed them into, and then at the same criminal justice included, and then at the same time relying on their roots and their foundations to rebuild themselves and get back to spirituality, get back to giving back to their communities, get back to empowering themselves and their families. And so it was a beautiful journey for me because I got to see both worlds and come back home and see my community in a different light as well.
Nice, yeah. We've been doing a lot of work with youth up here in Yurok country and Hoopa, Karuk, Talawa, Wiyot country. And so I guess, a question to start out right out of the gate is, I think that it is our mission here at Two Feathers is to be able to work to help to create more Victor Rioses. And those and maybe even Virgil Moorheads or Chris Shaws, those that maybe didn't have that silver spoon or had to face very a legacy of political, historical, structural, systemic inequalities, oppression, racism. And my question is, with that sort of backdrop, like, if you could tell the audience a little bit more about, for those that don't know you, how you have become who you've become.
Yeah, so essentially my journey begins when I'm very little. I crossed the border with my mom and my older brother through the desert, and we got to Oakland, California, when we ended up kind of settling in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my mom, she tried to make ends meet, but she was getting minimum wage or less than minimum wage because she was undocumented and being exploited for her labor. And so essentially my brother and I struggled a lot. We didn't have a father. My father abandoned me before I was even born. My mom had been in prison when she was pregnant with me. So, I always talk about how I was doing time before I was even born, and my mom, talks about that experience as not just a negative experience, but an experience that then allowed me to develop a foundation of understanding of the struggles of people on the inside. Because she would tell me about how people on the inside would take care of her, even though they were considered criminals, right? So that the labels we put on people and then we lock people up, but they know how to take care of themselves, each other, and their community sometimes. And this is what my mom's struggle was about. So when we get to Oakland, things were rough, a lot of violence, a lot of drugs. It was the crack epidemic when I was coming up. I got caught up in it. I ended up in juvie 3 times. And so I wasn't learning my lesson, 3 felonies, still not learning my lesson. And then my best friend was shot and killed. And that's when I started to realize like I have to do something because I'm gonna end up in prison or dead. And sometimes I didn't care if I would go to prison. Sometimes I didn't care if I would end up shot and killed. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older and started to get mentored by college students, students that were um, following a path of learning about their history, following a path of spirituality, following the red road, if you will, following the path of learning about oppression and how to counter that oppression, of anti-colonial struggles, of getting rid of systems of oppression and systems of destruction of our communities. And it was this that motivated me. It took the blame away from me. And I was like, oh, I'm not the one that's stupid, and I'm not the one that's causing harm, um, unless I'm making bad choices. That harm that was being caused to me by the system is what I was then turning around and using to cause harm on others, including people in my community. So pretty quickly, over time, joining programs, being mentored and guided by teachers, I ended up realizing that I had to go and represent my community and my people in the university. So we go to college, we get master's degrees, we decide that we want to go and make it, it's not just for ourselves, right? In American culture and conventional American culture, what you go to college for is to build for yourself. Individualism is number one in American culture. But in collectivist cultures, Native American cultures, indigenous cultures, African American communities, Latinx communities, what you find is collectivist cultures. When I make it, you make it. When I make it, we make it. I represent my people when I cross that stage. And when we're very little, even if we are struggling, even if people blame our parents for our failures, our parents are instilling in us a culture of giving for others, of having honor for others, of making it in this world for others. And that's what brought me here today.
Nice, thank you. That was very powerful and a good way to start. I'm going to throw it over to Chris because Chris is he's our prevention specialist, but he's also a mentor to many of the young men and young boys and girls, natives on the Hoopa Valley Reservation and then here on the coast. And so I know Chris wanted to talk with you a little bit about unpacking like what it takes to reach and be a mentor with some of these kids.
Yeah, that was very powerful. I know, like as someone who had like a bunch of mentors and learned from a bunch of different people, my question to you is like, how important is that mentorship role, and how have you taken what you've learned from other people and other mentors like into your work, into what you're doing with other people now?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Chris, mentoring is super important. In traditional societies, it wasn't called mentoring, right? It was just pretty much guidance and wisdom from our elders, right? And it could be an elder that's 2 years older or an elder that's 50 years older, but there was always that kind of wisdom from an entire interconnected community, right? That was interdependent, and that got stripped away from us with colonialism. That got stripped away from us with modern society, and so to think about mentoring in a culturally responsive way to our local communities is crucial. So how is mentoring a legacy already there in those communities? So some people say, oh, these people, they don't have guidance by elders or older people. They're doing, bad examples, bad role models. There's no good role models. But if you look deep in communities, those people that have been criminalized, demonized, stigmatized for having a health condition, which is sometimes drug addiction, are the very people that could turn it around and be the ones that are providing guidance, right? Those are the people that are sometimes our only mentors, right? So I think about like when I was in Oakland, some of the people that mentored me, most of them were crack addicts, right? They were lost. They were going in and out of the system. They were doing drugs, and people saw them as really bad example. They were the ones when I was hungry, they would feed me. When I needed advice, they would give me advice. When people were chasing me to beat me up, they were the ones that would shelter me. So we have to complicate our understanding of who is considered a mentor. Just because you got a college degree doesn't mean you can automatically mentor people. You have to also be responsive to where we come from and come at us at the level of respect that we understand. And that's different arenas, different areas. You're talking about geographies too, that with 20 miles of each other, you can have very different cultures as well, even within the same groups, communities, so-called races of people, right? And so we have to complicate things. If you're someone that mentors, that is a counselor, a therapist, a provider, a teacher, an educator for young people, just remember that every time you have to relearn that local community's culture. And I'm not just talking about the larger community, I'm also talking about the youth themselves. 5 years from ago, youth culture was different than 5 years now, you know? So you have to kind of understand what youth are into. I give this example sometimes. I gave a TED talk and, it's got some views. And so one day I was at a high school giving a in assembly, and the principal, this is a few months ago, said, "Oh, hey students, this is Dr. Rios. He gave a TED talk. He's got 1.4 million views. Holler at him, right?" And then so the students clapped. I gave my speech. They came off the bleachers afterwards, and they're like, "Okay, Dr. Rios, let me have your TikTok." And I was like, "Oh, no, I don't have TikTok." They're like, "My principal said you got TikTok, man, 1.4 million." I said, "No, man, I don't got TikTok. I just have a TED talk, right?" And so that that goes to show you that within just a few years span, right, young people from 5 years ago wouldn't even know what TikTok was. But these youngsters were like all about TikTok. And so that moment, this is just a few months ago, it's like, like I got to figure out what this TikTok thing is. So you have to understand that young people are going to be in a different cultural space sometimes. And you have to kind of understand that cultural space if you're going to be a proper mentor to them, right? That doesn't mean you have to try to be one of them, but you do have to come at them at their level. And that's, I think, rule number one when you're mentoring. Come at youth at their level. Sometimes you're of a different ethnicity, race, gender, age, sexuality, but if you come at them at their level and respect them at their level, then you're closer to making a connection with them.
Thank you. I love your answer to that question. And what I always tell my kids is like, it doesn't matter that I'm going to college or doing this. I'm trying to be as authentic, like you said, and as much as myself as possible. And that's why I feel like I connect more with the kids that I have. And that kind of brings me my follow-up question is how can you, as a mentor, like lead these kids into a certain path, but also be yourself and also be have those experience and have those good and bad stuff happen to you.
Yeah, well, as a mentor, almost have to be a shapeshifter, right? And you have to almost walk the professional realm, because you can't blur the lines too much either, right? When I was mentoring gang associate youth in the area, and I was a bit younger, I was just out of college, and I was a youth program specialist, and I used to, the youth would cut school and I would go with them, and then they would go to the park and they would have fights with each other. I would just say, okay, on the boxing gloves, and then I'll be, the referee. and and they settled their disputes with boxing gloves instead of knives or guns, and so for me that was success, right? So sometimes you do have to kind of, you know, break the rules a little bit, but sometimes you also have to keep the professionalism, because that professionalism gives you legitimacy, and the legitimacy is what allows you to help youth even further, right? So always in a shapeshifter, like, okay, where are they at? And then letting them know, like, look, meet you this far, but I can't go all the way because that's your realm, and I have to respect your realm as a youth. So I give the social media example. Maybe your own personal social media account that you share with family, maybe sometimes it's not the one that you make a connection with your youth with as well, but maybe you have another media account that is just for your connection with the youth. And the example is on TikTok. If you do a hashtag teacher search, you'll find some teachers that are very lousy at it, and then finally some teachers that are very good at it. They have accounts where it's just for them and their students. It's very transparent. Everyone can see what's going on, and the teachers are trying to make a connection with the students. And in the same way, as someone that helps young people, if you know that right now it's hard to find them on Zoom, it's hard to find them in Google Classroom, because 40% of them are not checked in, and those are our youth. Those are the ones you're working with, Chris. Those are the ones you're working with, Virgil. Then where are they? Well, they might be on TikTok. They might be on another platform, and then you have to go there and send those messages in a different way. Again, that's keeping you professional, not blurring any lines, not making you, suspect in terms of like, wait, this person connecting too intimately with the students, and at the same time, you know, being able to say, yeah, I'm there for them. I got their back, and they know it, and everyone can see it. And that's my transparency as a mentor.
Nice. And one follow up on this sort of area of, I think, your expertise, which is really reaching some of these, multi-stress, sort of harder to reach youth, and really, observing them. And you did it not only as in direct sort of work in a mentorship role, but also with in regards to research. And so, just a follow up question to Chris's is like, how much do you think, in a community like, let's say, our Native American community up here, is it important to have your own, to develop and build your own? Because what I've took from watching some of your talks and your documentary is that you were able to connect uh, because you've experienced it in part, and you're able to be real, and it seems like your personality is able to really connect. And so I'm just wondering, like, your thoughts of, for those individuals that are working with youth, like how important relationships are, or emotional intelligence is, and how, if you're not from this the community that you're working in, how can you develop some of that emotional intelligence so that you can connect with the youth that are the hardest to reach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a two-tier strategy. If you're not from that community, right? And the reality is, even in the state of California, as diverse as it is, majority of teachers are still, the majority of practitioners are still white, right? And with good intention, most of them. And so you're one of those practitioners, right? How do I connect with the youth? I'm of a different culture. And, you know, it really becomes a question of understanding where they're coming from and being willing to take those risks, being willing to be that person that visits their community, that visits, their home, even during these tough times, right? There's ways to do it where you're still social distance. There's ways to do it where they visibly see you, right? Just because everyone says, um, stay home and just meet with students on cyberspace, on Zoom or whatever, doesn't mean you can't, and especially eventually, right, make attempts at having a very kind of uh, um, safe, socially distanced, conversation with some of them in person, right? So knowing where these young people are coming from, knowing their communities. Have you ever been to their communities? Have you ever driven by? You don't gotta be off quarantine and just drive by where they live. And I bet you anything, they're gonna be outside chilling with each other, because they're building squad. That's how they're backing each other up, making it through. So if they're already out and about, just on the corner, you know, why not drive by there and just wave and roll down your window and be like, 10 feet away, like, hey, we can't really be close, but I just wanted to say what's up, like, doesn't matter where you come from, where you grew up, who you are, with the color of your skin. With that said, though, those of you, particularly my colleagues that are white, I do have to tell you that you have the most pull, the most power in convincing the system that we have to create a pipeline of organic intellectuals, meaning the youth of that community, bringing them up so that they go get educations, they go get those same credentials, come back, and now they are the educators, practitioners, counselors, therapists for their own community. So it's a balance of both, right? I believe in the full circle of support, that I need my own to support me, but maybe I need to hear the perspective of someone on the other side of the circle to support me too. So my best mentors have been from different perspectives. Some of them BTDTs, right? Been there, done that. BTDT, right? People from our experience. Virgil, I know you have a similar experience of school, of adversity, of going through the system, and you're here today. They need us. But at the same time, they also need to see that there's people from the mainstream society that are willing to fight for us as well.
That makes sense. And one of the, as a follow-up, just to kind of get into a little bit of the details and the sort of more practical ways of what this looks like on the ground. I have a question about sort of your research methodology, as you talk about in your one of your books, is like that you try to observe them over a sustained period of time and from multiple contexts. So, you know, use the example of it's not just like you take a picture and the picture stands still and then you label them and say they're this way, right? And so my question is that you were talking about sort of your research methodology, but I was thinking that that's kind of similar to maybe being a teacher or maybe being a therapist, that you want to be able to understand the children and the students that you work with in as many different contexts and understand who they are. Would that be a fair sort of interpretation about your thinking?
Absolutely, Virgil. Yeah, that's actually a brilliant analysis, because what happens to our communities in the long legacy of colonialism, whether it's indigenous communities, there is the African communities that were brought to the U.S. For slavery, um, is that from day one, there was a misrepresentation and mislabeling of our peoples, right? And it was the misrepresentation of our peoples was, you know, like one of the first colonists, you know, that set up the city of Boston, around Boston, Massachusetts. Um, Mathers was his name, was his last name, Mathers. And he said, you know, of the native people there, he said, these are the devil's children, right? And because they're the Cotton Mathers is his name, Cotton Mathers. He says, and he's one of the first settlers, right? So he's like, hey, these are the devil's children. And so, and the devil sent them here so that the Lord's empire could never encounter them, but we've arrived, right? So the first thing they say about native peoples is, you know, they're the devil's children, right? And that's, you know, a few hundred years ago. You fast forward to today, and what are they saying about our communities still? You know, we're criminals, we're drugged up, we're alcoholics, you know, we were bad role models, we got bad health habits, you know, everything. You know, let's talk about COVID-19 and colonialism. COVID-19, that virus came from capitalist America, right? Traveling international, multinational travelers, the capitalist leaders, the managers traveling between, you know, different places, bringing that virus to the US, right? These are multinational capitalists, and spreading it in our communities. And then now the blame is on who? On us. Just recently, the Surgeon General was talking about the Black community and how they have bad health habits and they're spreading it among each other. They're saying that about Native communities where there's a high rate, oh, it's bad practices, they're not taking care of each other. But they don't talk about how that virus was first brought by capitalist interests to the US. And then after that, they don't talk about then how they waited so long to prevent the spread, and they didn't even tell our communities about it until it was too late. So the reason I'm bringing this is because there's a way in which our communities from day one all the way to today are misrepresented, mislabeled, criminalized, demonized. And so we have to work as a population of practitioners to push for policies that are decriminalizing, destigmatizing, switching out the labels that are placed on these young people we work with. An example, recently, the state of California, we managed to push and push for 20 years and lobbied to change California Education Code. In 2019, it finally changed. Gavin Newsom signed the law, the At Promise bill. So you're no longer under California Education Code allowed to call kids at risk. Why is that so important? Because when you label me risk, you're going to treat me as a risk. And oh, I work with at-risk kids. Well, that's not the way to go. You work with at-promise kids, or you develop a label that's not based on a deficit, but it's based on an asset perspective. What do our people have to bring and offer? They have an asset. They have something positive to contribute. And so therefore, it's important to think about the ways that we label and represent the people we work with, and let those labels come from them. And of course, you help them come to a critical consciousness where they're also not placing a negative label on themselves. So that's a crucial first step in working with our vulnerable communities, to have those labels changed to be more asset based.
Thank you. And, you know, as a follow-up, we've talked about the importance of mentors. We've talked about, now the importance of, deconstructing labels and ways that institutions and language seek to sort of dehumanize many brown people and people of color. And one of the things that we haven't touched on so much is more at the institutional level. And I know you have done an extensive amount of research and an expert in the sort of school to prison pipeline, but also more specifically, this culture of control. And we do a lot of work within the schools. And, one of the things I know you talk about is the ways that authority figures in just the system actually perpetuate the issue that they're trying to solve in the first place. And so I wanted you to, Victor, to just unpack that a little bit for the audience, this idea of the culture of control and these resource officers in the schools and this sort of the politics of that.
Well, unfortunately, as a society for over 40 years now, we have invested in securitizing our schools and over policing our schools, and setting up our children to fail and end up on the streets, end up outside of school, and then be vulnerable to negative encounters with police, end up with a ticket, then court, then probation, then juvie, then county jail, and then prison. And all these youth I followed all these years, I go back and trace the first citation they got, and I was there to see it. And it was like for smoking weed on the corner. And I see them in prison, a few years later, and I asked them, hey, what did you do to go to prison? They're like, I don't know. I just ended up here. What do you mean you don't know? You didn't do violence? Nope. Big felony? Nope. And I go back and I trace their record, and it ends up that it was from that smoking weed on the corner, they get probation, they violate probation, they get in a fight, they end up in juvie, they go to some camp program, they run away from camp, they end up getting put in juvie for a few weeks. That doesn't work out. They come out, they're on probation again, they're 17, about to turn 18. Oh, they get caught up, they end up in county. Why? Violating probation again. They're in county, they get in a fight. Oh, now all of a sudden they're big time gangsters. Oh, guess what? Now we're going to ship you to prison. And you look at their credentials, and it's like, how can it be that these young people are sent to prison for low level, no violence offenses? And it's a big story for a big part of our populations. And so it's crucial to understand that schools need to shift, and some of them have. There is a movement where schools have shifted from really harsh punishment to restorative justice, to restorative approaches, restorative practices, and what I call transformative justice, right? Because restorative is about just restoring a person, but we want to restore the institution as well, because the institution, again, is a colonial enterprise that is set up to either fail us, or if it makes us succeed, it ships us somewhere else, and it says, far away from your community, be individualistic, survive and thrive for yourself, not for others, right? So we decolonize that space, take it over, and say, now these schools are going to be set up for healing. Now these schools are going to be set up to restore not just our youth, but the systems that have failed us. These schools are going to be set up to be agents of change in our society. And so that's the way to go. The next policy push that we're working on is to mandate every high school in the state of California to implement restorative justice approaches, so that when young people get in trouble, they're not automatically suspended or expelled, but there's a whole circle up process that happens. There's a whole healing circle that happens. There's a whole restoration process where you're paying back for what you did, but you're doing it in a positive community building way. So we're holding youth accountable, but it's in a way that's going to teach them a positive lesson. And by the way, don't let people fool you. Restorative justice has always been practiced in indigenous communities. Okay. And all of a sudden you got all these politicians and superintendents, jumping on the bandwagon claiming that they invented it, and that's colonialism too. It's like taking the US Constitution was taken from Native peoples, right? The Iroquois, right? And so now restorative justice is being claimed by these conventional people. But in reality, restorative justice is an indigenous practice. It's been practiced all over the world by indigenous peoples. And of course, it's modernized, but we still got to give credit where credit is due. And so to implement restorative approaches where young people are not encountering negative experiences with police all the time, that'll reduce the amount of our young people getting caught up in the criminal justice system.
Nice. And before I throw it over to my colleague Chris for another question, I had just a thought that came up as you were talking about, decolonizing and indigenous people. I'm curious, I know that you're, Mexican American, and are you pretty familiar with your indigenous part of yourself? Like, because the one thing that I think that we can do more of is collaborate across, let's say Native American communities and or we could call Latinx or Mexican American. And how do we because as I see it, we're both indigenous people, right? And so I'm just curious about your own sort of indigenous understanding of yourself. And if because I know one of the things you also talk about is like healing. When you say healing, it's like healing of the soul, which is not this sort of biomedical change your thoughts, but it's much deeper and comes from these indigenous roots. And so just curious about your own indigenous background.
Well, the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that sometimes with Mexican origin populations, what we tend to do is take on this kind of hegemonic indigenous kind of identity, and then we end up participating in invisibilizing Native American Indian communities. I just want to acknowledge that because I want to make sure that, those of you that are of Mexican American, Chicanx, Latinx origin, recognize that there is a way in which we participate also sometimes, right? In kind of invisibilizing the sort of localized, very localized folks in places like California and all over the country. So it's important, right, to know and acknowledge those folks and give them the space. And we're visitors. We're visitors in their land, right? And so we all are from Turtle Island. We're all kind of interconnected. We didn't cross the borders. The borders crossed us. We are indigenous. I'm browner than most of my indigenous brothers and sisters, but there's a way also in which we have to figure out how to live in harmony with one another and acknowledge each other's backgrounds in that way. So my own roots are that my father, who's estranged, I never got a chance to really get to know him, but I did meet him once as an adult, and it was a quick handshake. It was like I went to Mexico. Actually, it was cartel territory. It was pretty hot during that time, and so I risked a lot to go there. And I found him, and I was like, hey, his name's Cecilio. I'm like, are you Cecilio? He's like, yeah. Who's looking for him? I'm like, oh, I'm Victor. I'm your son. He's like, what do you want from me? And you can imagine, man, I felt like a little kid, even though I was a grown man. I felt like a little kid, like, man, this is messed up. And I just said to him, oh, I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to, meet you. And I shook his hand and I asked him where he was from. And I realized, he's from Oaxaca. He's Mixteco. So he's got those roots in Oaxaca, the Mixteco roots. And so that's part of my roots. And then my mom's family is from the mountains of Michoacan, Mexico. So you have the Purepecha people there. So those are kind of the indigenous roots. And my mom still remembers her grandparents kind of dressing their indigenous attire, speaking the language, singing and dancing. Unfortunately, colonialism affected us all to the point where, especially for some Mexicans, we were just, you guys aren't indigenous, you guys are a cosmic race, right? You guys are a little bit of everything, and be proud of your Spanish roots, and that's why they call us Hispanic. You know, to eliminate and folks darker than me try to pretend they're European, because they're so ashamed of being indigenous. So that's another kind of colonization that we have to kind of shake off our backs. But those are the roots I come from. But when I started to, again, learn about the Red Road, learn about indigenous practices, go to sweat lodges, go to medicine ceremonies, I got to learn that. I started to reflect about, what it means to come from almost like a hegemonic indigenous identity because of the numbers that we have, right? We're such a big population, and we all Mexicans, Americans start to claim that we're all Aztecs, and we're part of this big indigenous enterprise. It really kind of doesn't do a service to our other brothers and sisters from other tribes. So I think that's the conversation. It's real conversations we need to have between indigenous populations and kind of reconvene, like you said, Virgil, to have one understanding of us all that allows for multiple identities. Or the Zapatistas in Chiapas, they say, un mundo donde muchos mundos viven, right? One world where many worlds can live. And I think that's the goal with indigenous peoples.
Nice. Thank you for that. Tying that back to the schools, I know one of the themes of our speaker series with people like Jeff, Andre Duncan, and Pedro, and others that have been on, they've talked about the importance of cultural identity, the importance of understanding yourself and relationships, and how that helps the students and the youth that we're working with get through school, and how that's just as important as learning math or science, that understanding who you are as a person and where you come from should be part of the curriculum or part of the school system, because it leads to wellness.
That's right. Also in Spanish we say la cultura cura, right? Culture heals, and that's true. That's the strongest thing. And I was just writing a paper last night, actually, with my wife Rebecca, who's a professor of education, and we met a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, working with At Promise students. Actually, the kids set up on our first date, and we were working on a paper about making an argument, actually, that the first teacher of social movement organizing for our communities is the family. A lot of people say, oh, you all come from broken families. But if you dig deep, our uncle, our, elders, even sometimes a parent that might be disconnected. Like my mom was disconnected. She never really had that emotion, the love of a mother for her children, or she didn't show it. She was, she was a rock, and she wanted us to be rocks because we had to survive in a rough terrain, and only rocks could survive in rough terrain. So if she made us soft, we would fall apart. And that was her logic. So she made us rough. She didn't hug us. She didn't say, I love you. She was like, come on, let's go. Just get through it. you're crying. Okay, wipe it off. Come on, let's go. She was that kind of a mother. Anyway, when they say we come from broken homes, what they don't recognize is that then the other piece of my mother is that while she's teaching me to be rough and tough and not really helping me with having multiple emotions, she's also teaching me that I need to change the world. She's also saying to me, look, son, when you grow up, you're going to be someone and you're going to help your people. When you grow up, you're going to be someone, you're going to help your community. When you grow up, you're going to make sure, see how that guy just treated me and is paying me below minimum wage because I'm illegal. You're going to change that, Victor. And it built in me this desire to want to go and confront the system and be part of a social movement. So the first teacher of being a social movement activist and an organizer is not an ethnic studies class, but that's great to have. It's not a professor. It's not a community organizer. The first teacher in our communities of a social movement practice or praxis, what we call, is the family. No matter how broken the system claims our families are, they're always teaching us, right, to build change in our society. And so that becomes crucial because the family then becomes not a deficit, not a burden. Like, oh, you come from that family, pull away. We're going to save you by pulling you away from your family, putting you here, sending you to Princeton, and then never come back, right? That's how we save you. Nah, we're gonna work with you so you can go back and transform your own family. My mom, she was hard like a rock. She never listened. She never, she was very abusive to us. Now as an adult, she watched me for the last 20 years, how I raised my kids, how I changed my life, how I healed my soul, as Virgil says. And just the other day, I'm talking 10 days ago, she called me up. She's like really hit hard by this COVID-19 thing. She's stressing her out. And for the first time ever, she said, son, I've been thinking I was too harsh on you. And for the first time ever, she said, I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Right. And so took 20 years, but all to say that by leading, I want to think by example, how she saw me raise my family, how she saw me healing, how she saw me talking through my problems and expressing myself and being emotional, that she was able to also change. So it wasn't like I saw my mother as a deficit I came from. I saw her as someone that had struggled, didn't teach me right about my emotions, but taught me right about changing the world for people that have been left behind.
Nice. Very, very powerful. So let me remind those that are viewing us online, you could ask a question. I look over to the right. I got the questions coming up. People are saying they wish they had an emoji so they can snap their fingers about what you're saying.
Thank you.
Some positive feedback.
I gotta let y'all know that I wish you had emojis too, but I hope it's not the middle finger emoji. That's all.
I think it's I spent a little time when I was at Stanford before I moved back home, and the students, they very much were into that snapping the fingers to say that's powerful. So Chris, I know you had a question. So in the audience, ask some questions. I could ask Victor before we have a little bit of time left. And so Chris, I'm turning over to you. I don't want to leave you out of the conversation.
Honestly, you guys are having such a good conversation. I was just listening to everything. I didn't even have to butt in at all. But I was like really, really moved by your talking about your family, because it kind of got me like thinking about my parents and my identity, because I come from a native indigenous home. I also come from a Black home. So there's this stigma that if you're a Native person or you're a Black person, you're basically the chance of me going to jail, going this and all that stuff are very, very high. Disregarding the fact that both of my parents are very smart. Both of my parents worked their butts off, but my grandparents worked their butts off. And I see that in a lot of my kids. So they're trying to get through this identity crisis of, I'm this person and society tells me I'm this. And I wonder if you could talk about like how important it is to not look through a colonistic mindset when talking about family and your identity, how to make it more like a positive and something that's good for you.
Yeah, I just want to send a shout out to the shapeshifters. Chris, you're a shapeshifter, and you know exactly what I mean when I say that, right? You coming from two powerful traditions, right? You shapeshift, and so to be proud of it, it's the thing to be a shapeshifter, and it happens when you're multiracial, but it also happens when you're of one community trying to understand the mainstream community, right? Um, I as much as I've made it in the system, right, with my doctorate, my books, my professorship, even had an opportunity to advise the Obama administration on gun violence and policing in America. My family got to meet President Obama. It was a beautiful experience. And in that pinnacle moment there, I'm thinking like, man, like how can this kid, that was from the streets and homeless at times end up at the White House meeting the president? And you think like, oh, it's the shape shifting, right? That never turn into someone that, wants to be just one identity, right? Oh, we'd be proud of being a shapeshifter. And in many indigenous traditions, right, there's stories about shapeshifters. And the shapeshifters are those that are able to navigate multiple worlds, right? Uh, so continue on with that paradigm, right? As practitioners, that the youth need to learn that it's okay. You want to be part of your youth culture. That's okay. You want to also, though, let me teach you about conventional world, because one day you're going to have to learn to look people in the eyes, right, and say, thank you very much, appreciate the interview, and shake their hand. But then if you go to your elders, you're not going to be all up in their face and their eyes. That's disrespectful. So, you go back to being your humble self, right? That's shape-shifting too. So that's, as practitioners, we have to teach our youth that it's okay to be a shapeshifter, because what colonization has done to us, even to this day, is to teach us that it's bad to be this way and it's good to be this way, right? We're a very dualistic society, right? It's this or that, right? It's a binary society, and it's like you're a one or you're a zero. But in our worlds we come from, no, we're one and all, right? We're shapeshifters. So I could be a business person, handle business. I could be the most successful at my career, but then when I go to the hood, you're not gonna see me, oh, I'm an expert of this and I do this. Look, I'm just one of the guys. And then the homies, they'll come to me and they'll be like, Victor, you a teacher now, man? And I'm like, yeah, we have a teacher. Like, oh, we're proud of you, homie. That's it. I'm not like, oh, but I also met the president and I did this and I did that. Of course, if they ask, I offer. But otherwise, I'm just one. And that's what we get taught too. We have to be humble and modest, carry ourselves in that way of respect. But at the same time, the system gets really intrigued by us when we're shapeshifting. Like, why are you so articulate? Wow, are you so smart? You must be different. I'm like, no, I'm not different. I've just been given opportunities. That's all. Oh, you must be a genius. Nah, to Berkeley, got a PhD there, and you're from the hood. You must be special. No, I'm not special. Someone just gave me an opportunity. Why don't you go give more people from the hood an opportunity? That's the way that we structure it. It's not that, the system allows only a handful of us to make it. Now, system, you gotta crack open and allow more of us to make it.
Thank you. And I know in your book you use as an example in Punished about how, a young man, maybe, a teacher that come at him the wrong way, they would label him as disrespectful to authority figures, but then that same person maybe that night is at home cleaning elder person's house because it's a different context and there's a, you know, a more of appreciation of that person's context and cultural world.
Exactly that. Again, can't place a label on our youth, because once you do that, you get mistaken. And by the way, those of you that practice trauma-informed approaches, I don't call it that. It's a great paradigm. It really does get to trying to heal the soul, but be careful, because it's almost a deficit label, right? Trauma. We're not just traumatized. You know, we're also happy people. We're also joyful people. We're also giving people, kind people. You know, it's not like I got PTSD myself. You don't see me in a corner all, you know, watching my back all the time. Once in a while, I get a little bit like that, you know, but most of the time, you know, I'm a family man, this, I'm that. I'm not just traumatized. So instead of trauma-informed approaches, I call it emotion-informed approaches. And that goes back to Chris's and Virgil's question about being emotionally intelligent, right? That it's not just about teaching our kids to be emotionally intelligent. It's about teaching ourselves to be emotionally intelligent. So it's emotion-informed approaches, because now you could celebrate the multiple emotions that our young people are bringing when they show up, and be like, oh, look, you could be happy. Look, you just smiled, you just cracked up. Okay, let's see what brought that for you, and let's continue on that journey to keep you in this happy space in life.
That makes sense. So I see we're at the top of the hour. Do you have time for two questions from the?
Yeah.
All right. So we have a question from. You know, a lot of the comments and questions are. These are the words that I want to hear right now. You know, thank you. Thank you for bringing up my, you know, spirit. But one question is from Shoshone Hostler, and she says, "How do you balance between your research background and community role when you try to incorporate the youth's voice and really the work that you do with the youth? So how do you balance between that research and really doing the community work and also getting the youth voice heard?"
You know, it's tough, I have to admit, because, you know, when I went into research, I thought of myself as being a historian of the people, and and but my community, especially the activist community I came from, started to see me as like, wait, Victor, like, you know, it looks like you selling out, man. You're supposed to be over here, you know, organizing with us, and you're over there nerding out, you know, like writing books. But we all have a place to contribute from. And so if there's not enough of us historians of our people, then who's going to tell our stories? And those stories are going to be told by others. And when others tell our stories, well, you know what happens, right? And so I don't think some people understood that my role was to be a storyteller of our people in that research world. And then, so that was tough. But then when I try to make it in the mainstream research world, a lot of my white colleagues in particular will say, well, you're just doing community work, not doing true research. So I had to be better than a lot of my white colleagues in the research world just to get paid at the level that they were being paid. And it's still the same today. A lot of them still look at me like, why, why are you being celebrated? Like you're just one of them, right? And so it's still a very colonized enterprise. And so I'm trying to not to be co-opted into it, and at the same time be engaged in community. But when I go to the community, like, wait, you're one of those researchers that are here to colonize us, or at least to exploit us or to take advantage of us. And so then I have to prove myself to the community, which I respect that. I'll do that all day long. I've been to Ferguson, Missouri before Black Lives Matter started, when everything was burning there. I was there when Mike Brown, 2 weeks after he was killed by police there. I was documenting history in the making. I've been to various parts of the country to work with youth. I've been in Watts for the documentary film. I mean, I didn't set it up as a documentary. I was just working there, and PBS showed up, and the youth wanted to be part of it. I said, all right, let's do it. I've been in Oakland. I've been in various places working with youth, and every time I proven myself. Well, I don't want to say that. I want to say that I've worked very hard to gain as much trust as possible, and that's the best you can do. So balancing those two worlds is to um, make sure to do your best to gain the trust of community, and not everyone's going to trust you. Um, that's just a fact. And then on the flip side, that with the system and trying to prove ourselves to the system, sometimes we have to compromise, but then sometimes you just have to hold on to what you think, um, a battle you're willing to fight against the system, right? So it's important to speak truth to power, but it's equally important to speak truth to people. And I try to balance those two worlds out.
And it seems like one of the things that's integral to all of your work is the, you know, the great activist lawyer Brian Stevenson. He talks about being proximate, that you have, and you know, and that I kind of ties it back to what you originally had said, is that you got to get out of the office or get out of the classroom and get proximate, which means, you know, get close and understand and connect and be real. And, you know, in just in this interview, I feel like, you know, you're being real and being straight up. And I would guess that that's a big part of the trust building that you've been able to do in various communities, is just being real with who you are.
That at the end of the day, that's all we got. You know, it's just, and that's what, see, the system would see it as a deficit. Oh, you come from the ghetto, you come from a broken family, they didn't teach you anything. Wait a minute. What you see right here, if you have any appreciation of any of my ideas, any of my books, anything I've done, that's all that the dark world I come from, right? And I don't consider it that way. But some people would read it as, this is where you people come from. There's nothing that they had to offer you. And in reality, that's what make me who I am today. And so we have to cherish those backgrounds and of course correct them, because we can't also allow, you know, people to continue on cycles of abuse and cycles of, you know, whatever it is that people are doing, but hold them accountable, but at the same time also celebrate what they have to bring to the table.
And so I guess, you know, maybe one sort of home run hitting question that kind of brings it to our work brings it back to our work at Two Feathers, and really around sort of how does the disciplines of mental health and education and sociology intermix and work with each other. And so I know one of the things that you've really focused on in your work is how the system pushes out students, that they're not dropouts, right? Bringing it back to your awesome documentary. So maybe this is a two-part question to talk a little bit about your documentary, but also about where we are in education right now, and what you would, you know, as maybe a way to summarize what you've already talked about, or to add to, what do we need to do in the schools to help develop and reach those that are often at the margins, those that are often pushed out. Like you've been doing this work for, you know, decades, or been in this struggle. And so where are we at right now? What can we do? And, you know, maybe a last follow-up about your documentary.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, I think again, changing our practices of discipline, because it is our students of color or indigenous students that end up getting the worst treatment when it comes to harsh discipline. So changing those practices, implementing restorative justice, transformative justice in schools, mandating it for all schools in California. And it sounds, you know, far-fetched, but we can do it. We can change, especially right now with who's in Sacramento, the policymakers, they get it. And it's about going over there, having conversations with them and proposing policies like, look, we want this for all high schools so that it's no longer like, we choose not to do it in this district. No, everyone has to do it. I think that's crucial. Knowledge of self. So the ethnic studies, I know a lot of districts in the state have passed ethnic studies. So now let's build a good, solid curriculum that teaches our youth about themselves in a positive way, and that it's preparing them for college, and that it's credited as college prep material. And then finally, that we train a pipeline, create a pipeline of educators that are there for social justice. We need social justice literacy in our educators, intersectional justice literacy, right? And that's about understanding all our multiple identities. Like you hear Chris's powerful story, that's an intersectional story. And so we have to understand intersectionality, two-spirit people, multi-spirit people. How do we kind of engage in conversations with them and about them in a dignified way, right? That's about intersectionality. Making sure that schools become community serving institutions, that they stay open in the evening, that teachers are no longer just academic teachers, but they're teaching us about life, about emotional intelligence, about social emotional learning, about healing ourselves and our communities, and that teachers don't feel pressure to just teach us to the test, right? That we go beyond that. And so when you teach to the heart, the mind will follow. So those are the things I think we need to do in education to really help our young people out.
Thank you. Good final words. And, I guess as a follow-up with the documentary piece, maybe a more fitting question is where can people find you? I know you have a website, maybe any of your books or anything, what Victor Rios is up to nowadays and where people can find you.
Yeah, sorry about that, Virgil. Supposed to keep it humble, man. So just go ahead and find me on drvictorrios.com, drvictorrios.com. And I'm on social media too at Dr. Victor Rios. And the documentary is called The Push Out. So you could just pushing someone out, right? So you could look at thepushouts.com. I really appreciate being here, Virgil. Hey, you got to let me know who your barber is. It's about time to get a hairdo. Chris, I need to pick up some of those tennis shoes in the background. So, when quarantine's over, I could have you a fresh pair. I really appreciate you two gentlemen. Chris, good luck with your graduate degree. Let me know if there's any advice I could provide. Happy to be here. Virgil, thanks for the transformative work you do in the local communities for Indigenous young people, but also in the global context. You are a true change maker.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody that is tuned in to this fabulous talk on this Friday afternoon. For those of you that will be with us next week, we have some wonderful speakers. One, Mary Nagel, Catherine Nagel, she's going to be talking about sovereignty. That's on Wednesday. And Tuesday, we have the educator Megan Bang talking about native science. So tune in. We will be posting flyers. And thanks again, Dr. Rios. I want you to have a great weekend. Enjoy that sunny weather down there in Santa Barbara. We got some sun up here, and it's supposed to get pretty hot too up here. So everybody enjoy the sun as much as you can and stay safe out there. Stay healthy. And prayers to anybody that may be struggling with their health and any of these issues in this really difficult time. So
Thank you.
Take care.
Be blessed.